Imagine you're sitting across from a friend, right?
Yeah.
It's just a small, dimly lit room.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
And you're deep in one of those conversations.
Yeah.
You know the kind, right? Like hyper-focused, intense.
Oh, yeah, where the rest of the world just sort of completely falls away.
Exactly. So as the intellectual and, well, the emotional intensity of the conversation peaks, you start to notice the light bulb above you is dimming.
That's a bit eerie.
Right. And then it starts flickering. But it's almost rhythmic, like it's actually syncing up with the cadence of your voices.
Okay, now it's getting weird.
And then your friend literally looks up at the ceiling, looks back at you, and asks, "Do you think this is a manifestation?"
Wow.
And the exact second they finish that sentence, the light bulb gives this sharp, dry click and just completely blows out.
I mean, that honestly sounds like the inciting incident of a sci-fi novel. Or maybe a ghost story.
Right. Most of us would totally laugh it off. We'd say, oh, it's a faulty filament, or like a weird surge in the local power grid. Just a coincidence.
Sure, yeah. It's random chance.
But what if it actually wasn't a coincidence? What if that popped light bulb was literally the byproduct of human biophysics?
That is quite the leap.
I know. But what if human consciousness, like when it's pushed to an absolute unfragmented maximum capacity, what if it generates an electromagnetic field strong enough to literally interact with the physical circuitry of a room?
Well, that is the staggering premise we are exploring today.
It really is.
We are diving into a highly specific, honestly incredibly complex framework from 2026. It's called the Prism of Odysseys.
Or Le Prisme des Odyssées, right?
Exactly, written by Alain-Henri Regis-Imbert. And look, while the author's background does include some deeply intense autobiographical periods of trauma and, well, societal detachment,
Intense is definitely the word.
the framework itself is not some mystical, esoteric text. It's really structured as an architectural blueprint of human biology and energy.
I want to say a huge welcome to you, our listener, because this deep dive was custom-tailored entirely around the stack of sources you sent us.
It's an amazing stack of sources, too.
It is. And we are taking this massive corpus of work and zooming in on its most crucial turning point, which is extension XXXCI extension 36.
Right. And to give everyone a sense of the scale here, the author spends the first 35 extensions meticulously mapping out a concept he calls the bio-G cell.
Which basically translates to biological software.
Precisely. It is the total sum of human consciousness, our physiological nervous system, and our energetic processing.
So it's basically the human operating system.
That's a perfect way to look at it. It's a whole package. But Extension 36 asks the ultimate question of the entire corpus.
Which is?
What happens when this bio-G cell reaches its absolute maximum coherence?
So, like, what happens when the hardware and the software are running so perfectly, so simultaneously, that there is zero lag, just zero fragmentation?
Yes, the state of peak optimization.
And I have to say, the sources you brought us to decode this are just wild. I mean, we are pulling from advanced biophysics, fluid dynamics.
Educational neurobiology, too.
Yeah, and even declassified quantum theories of consciousness, like the CIA's 1983 Gateway Process.
Which is a fascinating document in its own right, but we really should state right at the top. Our goal today is rigorous, impartial analysis.
Absolutely.
We aren't here to definitively prove or disprove whether a human brain can blow out a light bulb. Our job is to rigorously decode the mechanics of the author's framework.
Right, we're looking at the blueprints.
Exactly. We are going to look at the exact biological and physical domino effects that the author argues make these extraordinary states possible.
Okay, so if we want to understand this state of maximum coherence, I feel like we really have to start by looking at the opposite.
Baseline, yeah.
We have to look at where the author actually started from. Because, I mean, he wasn't exactly born into this state of perfect, serene flow.
Far from it, actually. The baseline reality for the author was characterized by extreme, almost paralyzing sensory hypervigilance.
Right.
He was diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder, specifically Asperger's combined with complex PTSD, and this stemmed from severe early childhood trauma.
And I think when a lot of people hear the phrase sensory hypersensitive, they picture, a kid who just doesn't like loud noises or gets fussy about a scratchy tag on their shirt.
Yeah, the text makes it very clear that this is a fundamental misunderstanding of neurodivergence, especially when it's coupled with severe trauma.
It's way more intense than just a scratchy tag.
Oh, absolutely. For this author, the world wasn't just stressful, it was physically invasive.
Wow.
The flicker of a neon light, the texture of a specific fabric, or even just the subtle, unspoken emotional shifts of the adults in a room.
Wait, unspoken emotional shift.
Yes, those weren't just annoyances to him. They were registered by his nervous system as actual physical assaults.
Okay, hold on, wait. How does an unspoken emotional shift become a physical assault? Can you walk me through the biology of that?
It comes down to something called the gut-brain axis, or in the original text, l'axe intestin-cerveau.
The gut-brain connection. I feel like we hear a lot about that in wellness circles
We
lately.
do, but the text takes it much deeper. The gut is often referred to as the second brain because the enteric nervous system contains roughly 500 million neurons.
500 million neurons.
500 million neurons just hanging out in our digestive tract.
Yes, it is a massive neural network. It operates independently, yet it's in constant lightning-fast communication with the brain via the vagus nerve.
Okay, so it's a huge data highway.
Exactly. And the text points out something incredibly profound. In traumatic environments, a child's body doesn't just digest food.
What else is the digesting?
It actively attempts to digest psychic chaos.
Digesting psychic chaos. Man, that is a vivid way to put it.
It really is, and the mechanics of it are fascinating when you break it down. When a child is in a constant state of hypervigilance, their brain's amygdala is basically just constantly sounding the alarm.
Pumping out stress hormones.
Exactly, flooding the system with cortisol and adrenaline. This chemical flood travels right down the vagus nerve and directly alters the gastrointestinal environment. So it's literally changing the physical state of the gut.
Yes, it changes the motility of the gut, it changes the permeability of the intestinal lining, which can lead to leaky gut, and most importantly, it drastically alters the microbiome.
So all that stress basically kills off the good bacteria and lets the bad stuff just thrive.
Precisely. The text references the emerging field of nutritional psychiatry, citing pioneers like Felice Jacka, to show that a disrupted microbiome creates a profound physiological vulnerability.
It's not just a stomach ache.
No, it creates systemic inflammation, and that inflammation travels back up to the brain, which further heightens the hypervigilance.
Because it's just this devastating feedback loop.
Exactly. The author's early food intolerances and severe digestive issues weren't behavioral caprices, they were the measurable biological reality of a nervous system that was stuck in a state of constant, desperate overdrive.
And then you take this child whose nervous system is already practically on fire, and you drop them into a traditional school environment.
Which the author analyzes using the sociologist Pierre Bourdieu's concept of symbolic violence.
Okay, let's ground this for a second, because symbolic violence sounds very academic.
It does.
So picture a highly neurodivergent, hypervigilant kid sitting in a classroom. Above him is a fluorescent light. To a neurotypical kid, it's just a light.
Right. They probably don't even notice it.
But to this kid, because of his sensory processing, that light is visibly flickering 60 times a second. And it's emitting this high-pitched buzzing frequency that his brain processes at the exact same volume as the teacher's voice.
It's an overwhelming sensory load.
Exactly. And while his nervous system is treating this light as a blaring fire alarm, the teacher hands him a timed, purely linear math worksheet and essentially grades his human worth on how quickly he can fill it out.
That is the perfect illustration of the concept. Educational neuroscience shows us that traditional schooling evaluates nonlinear, systemic, neurodivergent thinkers using purely linear neurotypical tools.
So they're basically setting them up to fail.
The violence is symbolic because it isn't physical, obviously, but it is systemic and deeply, deeply damaging.
Because it demands conformity to a system they literally aren't wired for.
Exactly. It treats children with radically different cognitive architectures as if they should all process information the exact same way.
And when they predictably can't do that, it creates a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? The Pygmalion effect.
Precisely. The system actually anticipates failure from a child who carries socioeconomic and neurological markers of vulnerability.
So the teacher expects the kid to be difficult or maybe slow.
Yes, and that expectation inherently changes how the teacher interacts with them, which, in turn, stresses the highly perceptive child even further, essentially ensuring the failure they predicted.
But the author didn't just fail out and fade away, did he?
No, his response to this incredible overwhelm was to rigorously observe it.
He treated himself like a test subject.
He really did. He started tracking exactly why he felt so physically exhausted around certain people and in certain environments. And that leads to one of the central pillars of his early work.
The theory of charge, recharge, and discharge.
Exactly. The author realizes that because his autistic, traumatized brain lacks the normal filters that neurotypical people have, he is actually picking up on a fundamental biological truth.
Which is?
Human brains are not closed systems. We are profoundly permeable.
Okay, let me pause you there. Because when we start talking about exchanging energy with people or people draining us,
It sounds a bit new age.
it really does. It sounds a lot like the pop psychology buzzword of an energy vampire. Everyone has that one coworker who walks into the office, sighs really loudly, and suddenly you feel like you need a 3-hour nap.
Right, the classic energy drain.
I've always thought of that as just a psychological metaphor. Are you saying there's an actual physical transfer of energy happening?
The sources are absolutely adamant that this is not a metaphor. The text grounds this experience in measurable biophysics.
Okay, I'm listening. Walk me through it.
Let's look at the mechanisms of emotional contagion and physiological mimicry. First, you have to consider the human heart.
Okay.
The heart actually generates the largest electromagnetic field in the entire body. It is roughly 60 times greater in amplitude than the electrical activity generated by the brain.
Wait, really? The heart is putting out a bigger electrical signal than the brain. I always assumed the brain was the powerhouse.
By a massive margin, the heart wins. And this field is measurable by a device called a magnetocardiograph from several feet outside the body.
Okay, so we are all literally broadcasting a measurable electromagnetic bubble.
Exactly. Now, when your stressed out coworker walks into the room, their heart rate variability is chaotic and their cortisol levels are spiking.
Because they're stressed.
Right. And through a process called neurological synchronization, your brain, specifically your mirror neuron system and your insula, unconsciously detects all of this.
So I'm picking up their stress signals.
Yes. Your brain detects their microexpressions, shifts in their pheromones, and even the subtle electromagnetic variations of their heart field.
So my brain is actively reading their stress data.
And it doesn't just read it, it mimics it. Your heart rate actually begins to synchronize with theirs.
No way.
Yes, your own adrenal glands start producing a sympathetic cortisol spike. Your body is literally physically absorbing their physiological state.
That is wild.
For a neurotypical person, this might just feel like a vague sense of annoyance or wanting to leave the room.
But for the author.
For the author, whose biogesial lacked those natural dampening filters, it was a torrential, overwhelming flood of raw biological data. He was like a high-fidelity receiver for a broadband signal we are all constantly broadcasting.
So his trauma basically forced his hardware to become acutely, painfully aware of this invisible Wi-Fi we are all transmitting.
That's a great analogy. And realizing that this exchange is physical, not just psychological, forces a massive shift in his work. He realizes that if the trauma is held in the literal biophysics of the body, then the cure must also be biophysical.
Okay, so how exactly does the hardware process these invisible inputs? Because the author uses some deeply hard physics to explain practices that most people, frankly, just brush off as purely esoteric.
Yes, he does.
Like things like karasansui, which are those beautifully raked Japanese Zen gardens, or things like mudras, Reiki, and sound therapy.
This is where the Prism of Odysseys truly flexes its transdisciplinary scope.
Right.
It takes these ancient, seemingly mystical practices and overlays them with contemporary neuroendocrinology and fluid dynamics.
Fluid dynamics. Okay, now I'm really curious.
To understand how this heals the biogesial, we have to look at the HPA axis. That's the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis.
Okay, the HPA axis, that's essentially the body's main stress response system, right? Like the central alarm bell.
Correct. When you are stressed, your hypothalamus releases CRH, corticotropin-releasing hormone. That tells your pituitary gland to release ACTH, which then travels all the way to your adrenal glands and tells them to pump out cortisol. You are now officially in fight or flight mode.
Right, the assembly line of panic.
Exactly. Now, the text details how specific, coherent stimuli can manually shut this assembly line down.
What kind of stimuli are we talking about here?
Things like the harmonic sound of a deeply chanted mantra, or observing the precise fractal geometry of a Zen garden, or the incredibly light, specific touch used in Reiki.
And how does that shut down the alarm?
These stimuli actively stimulate the vagus nerve. And when the vagus nerve is stimulated, it releases acetylcholine,
Acetylcholine, right.
which acts as a profound inhibitor. It physically blocks the release of that first hormone, CRH.
So the alarm bell basically gets unplugged.
Yeah.
But the cortisol is already dumped into your blood, right? You don't just instantly calm down the second you hear a singing bowl.
No, you don't. And this is where the author's precision is really remarkable. He doesn't just vague out and say, you relax.
What does he do?
He provides the literal mathematical equation for cortisol clearance. It's an exponential decay equation.
Math. Okay, let's hear it.
It's C of t equals C0 minus CE times e to the negative KCl times t plus CE.
Okay, I got to be honest.
Right.
Reading a complex math equation on an audio format might lose a few people. What does that actually look like happening inside the body?
Okay, think of it like watching water drain from a bathtub.
I can picture that.
C0 is the total amount of water, or, in this case, stress hormone in the tub right when you pull the plug.
The peak stress moment.
Right. And KCl is the size of the drain, which represents the metabolic clearance constant of your liver and your kidneys, which are greatly aided by vagal tone.
So the better your vagus nerve is functioning, the bigger the drain?
Exactly. There is a quantifiable, exact mathematical rate at which the stress molecules are physically filtered out of your blood. It is a mechanical, predictable, biological process.
Initiated just by the acoustic or tactile frequency you introduce to the body?
Yeah.
That is incredible. But the text goes even deeper than the bloodstream, doesn't it? Like it goes down to the literal nerves in the skin.
Yes, it does. Let's look at the biophysics of something like a mudra, or the gentle touch of a Reiki practitioner. Human skin contains very specific nerve endings called C-tactile fibers.
Okay, C-tactile fibers. These are the unmyelinated ones, right?
Exactly.
I remember reading somewhere that they don't process pain or temperature. They literally only process soft, slow touch, like a mother stroking a baby's arm.
That's spot on. They are evolutionarily designed purely for social bonding and soothing. They have a very specific conductive speed.
So what happens when you trigger them?
When you stimulate a C-tactile fiber, it sends a slow electrical impulse up the spinal cord. But it bypasses the standard sensory cortex and goes straight to the insular cortex.
And what happens when the signal hits the insula? Let's trace the dominoes here.
When that slow signal arrives, the brain triggers a massive release of oxytocin and beta endorphins.
The feel-good chemicals.
Yes. Now here is where the biophysics gets truly breathtaking. These endorphins flood the cellular environment, and they bind to what are called G-protein-coupled receptors.
Okay, I always try to picture these receptors as, like, complex molecular keyholes sitting on the surface of a cell.
That is a perfect analogy. The endorphin is the key.
Okay.
When the endorphin slides into the keyhole, it actually changes the physical shape of the receptor. This shape change triggers a cascade inside the cell that physically forces open a very specific gateway on the cell membrane.
A gateway for what?
For potassium. Specifically, the K2P channels-2 domain potassium channels, one called TRK1 is specifically mentioned.
Okay, so we've opened a potassium gateway. What does that actually do to a nerve cell that is actively panicking?
It causes positively charged potassium ions to just flood out of the cell.
Leaving the inside less positive.
Exactly. It drops the internal electrical charge of the cell, putting it into a state of hyperpolarization.
Hyperpolarization. Put that in plain English for me.
It acts as a molecular roadblock. Because the cell's internal electrical charge is so extremely low, it becomes temporarily impossible for it to fire an action potential.
It can't spark.
Right. It literally blocks pain and stress signals from traveling. The nervous system is forced, chemically and electrically, into a state of deep, unshakable rest.
So a slow, intentional touch on the skin physically jams the electrical circuitry of stress.
That is exactly what happened.
That makes total sense.
Yeah.
But the author also talks about the physical structure of the body holding trauma.
Yeah.
Right. Not just the nerves, but the actual tissue.
Yes.
Specifically the fascia. That's the web of connective tissue that wraps around literally every muscle, organ, and nerve in our bodies. And he uses a concept to explain this that I usually associate with robotics: granular jamming.
Applying the rheology of granular media to human biology is honestly one of the most innovative leaps in the prism of odysseys.
For those who haven't seen it, granular jamming is amazing. Roboticists will take a flexible balloon and fill it with, like, loose coffee grounds.
Right, a very simple setup.
When it's just sitting there, it's squishy. You know, it molds to whatever it touches. But the second they use a vacuum to suck the air out, the coffee grounds jam tightly together and the balloon becomes as hard as concrete.
It undergoes a phase transition.
And then when they let the air back in, the physical constraints release, and it turns back to mush.
Is the author saying our biological fascia does this?
Yes, exactly that. The collagen network in our fascia acts like a dense granular material. The text uses an equation from fluid dynamics involving something called the inertial number, denoted as I.
Okay.
When a traumatized body is constantly bracing itself, constantly in that state of hypervigilance, the fascia tightens, the water gets squeezed out, and the collagen fibers physically jam together.
Mm-hmm.
The tissue becomes totally rigid.
It becomes physical armor,
Yes,
which totally explains why people with severe CPTSD often have chronic pain or rigid posture or just deep tension. They literally cannot stretch away. It's not just a tight muscle. The tissue itself is changed state.
precisely.
Yeah.
It's structural. But here is the mechanism of release. Okay, how do we let the air back into the balloon?
When the body is subjected to the right vibrational frequencies, whether that is the acoustic wave of a singing bowl or the coherent photons of low-level light therapy, or deep, sustained tactile pressure, that vibration travels through the tissue.
Adding energy to the system.
Exactly. It adds kinetic energy to the jammed collagen matrix.
And that changes the inertial number.
Yes. As the kinetic energy is absorbed, the inertial number approaches zero. I approaches zero.
Okay.
The text describes this as a jamming transition or a glass phase transition. The physical friction locking collagen fibers together instantly releases.
The armor melts.
The chronic physical tension literally melts away in seconds because the physical state of the tissue has transitioned at a microscopic level, just like letting the air back into that balloon of coffee grounds.
Okay, that is mind-blowing. But wait, we can't really talk about fascia without talking about what is inside it. Because fascia is mostly water, right?
Mostly water, yes.
But the author argues it's not normal water, does he? He talks about easy water.
This is a crucial biophysical component of the whole framework. EZ water stands for exclusion zone water.
What makes it different from the water from my tap?
In bulk liquid water, the molecules are H2O, right? They're tumbling around randomly, crashing into each other. But in the early 2000s, researchers like Dr. Gerald Pollack discovered something amazing.
What did he find?
When water sits against a hydrophilic or water-loving surface, like the collagen proteins in our fascia, it fundamentally changes its molecular structure.
It becomes H3O2 minus, right?
Yes, it arranges itself into these beautifully structured, hexagonal, honeycomb-like sheets. It effectively becomes a liquid crystal.
A liquid crystal inside our body.
Yes, and in doing so, as it builds these sheets, it physically excludes protons and impurities, pushing them out into the surrounding bulk water.
Hence the name, exclusion zone.
Exactly. Now, this creates a massive separation of electrical charge. The EZ water layer is negatively charged, and the bulk water pushed beyond it is highly positively charged.
Wait, a negative pole and a positive pole, you just described a battery.
Exactly. Every single hydrophilic surface inside your body is essentially acting as a biological battery.
So when we're doing these practices like chanting, meditating, holding a specific mudra, we are interacting with these internal batteries.
What the text argues is that the harmonic vibrations from these coherent practices actually add radiant energy to the water. And this physically expands the thickness of this EZ layer.
Okay, so we're charging the battery.
Yes. And when this liquid crystal layer expands, it allows for a phenomenon called the Grothus mechanism.
The Grothus mechanism. Okay, break that down for me.
Normally, if an electrical signal wants to travel through water in your body, a physical ion basically has to swim through the liquid, which is relatively slow.
Right, like wading through a pool.
But in the highly structured crystalline grid of EZ water, an electrical charge can be passed from one water molecule to the next like a microscopic bucket brigade, almost instantly.
Wow.
It is ultra-fast proton conduction.
So it's basically the difference between driving a car across town with a message versus sending a fiber optic email.
That is a perfect analogy. By expanding the EZ water, you are literally upgrading the body's internal communication network to fiber optics.
I want to make sure I am fully grasping this because it shifts absolutely everything.
It's a big paradigm shift.
You are saying that tuning a radio to a harmonic frequency or feeling the deep vibration of a cello isn't just a psychological mood booster.
Not at all.
You are mechanically injecting kinetic energy into jammed collagen fibers to force a phase transition, while simultaneously expanding a liquid crystalline battery layer that basically turns the human body into a highly conductive bioelectric semiconductor.
That is the exact biophysical thesis of the text. The hardware of the biogel is being systematically, mathematically repaired and optimized.
It's defragmenting the hard drive.
Exactly. And that physical reality is the absolute prerequisite for understanding what happens next.
Right, because we haven't even gotten to extension 36 yet.
Exactly, because once the bio-G shell is fully repaired, once the trauma is cleared from the fascia, once those K2P channels are hyperpolarized, and the bioelectric semiconductor is conducting perfectly without the static of stress,
We arrive at the frontier,
we arrive at extension 36.
the ultimate upgrade. Extension XXXX, frequential synesthesia, the state of maximum coherence.
Yes. And to really understand what this state actually is, we must first clearly contrast it with classical neurological synesthesia.
Right. Classical synesthesia is what we usually think of when we hear the word. It's when people's senses are essentially cross-wired.
Right, like seeing sounds.
Yeah, like maybe 4% of the population might literally taste the flavor of strawberries when they hear a specific chord on a piano, or they see bright geometric shapes when someone says a certain word.
Yes, and the neurological explanation for that is that the sensory areas of their brain lack the normal inhibition that keeps sight, sound, and taste separate.
They just bleed into each other.
Exactly. It is fascinating, but it is ultimately an anomaly of cross-activation. Frequential synesthesia, as mapped out in the Prism of Odysseys, is not an anomaly.
It's not a glitch in the wiring.
No, it is not a glitch. It is an attainable, trainable state of absolute simultaneous coherence.
So it's a feature that's been unlocked by repairing the hardware.
Precisely. It is the state where all the different registers of the biogestural, the acoustic, the kinesthetic, the photonic, the biochemical, and the relational are processing data at peak capacity, perfectly synchronized, without any fragmentation.
So they're all firing at once, clearly.
Let's break down what happens when these registers are speaking together, as the text puts it. First, it explores the biophotonic register.
Now I have to push back here for a second. When we start talking about biophotons and sensing light around people, it sounds dangerously close to mysticism.
It does sound like aura reading.
Yeah, exactly. Are we talking about seeing glowing auras with our physical eyeballs?
The author is incredibly careful to distance this from magical thinking. It is not about a visual hallucination of a glowing halo.
Right.
It is about a biological reality detected by what he calls the sonde intégrale, the integral probe. Let's look at the science of UPE, ultra-weak photon emission.
Okay, what is UP?
Every living cell emits microscopic particles of light biophotons as a direct byproduct of oxidative metabolism.
When they make energy.
Exactly. When your mitochondria burn oxygen to create ATP energy, they release extremely weak but measurably coherent light. This isn't theoretical. We can capture this light with photomultiplier tubes in a darkroom.
So we're literally glowing, just at a level way too dim for the naked eye.
Yes. But when you enter a state of frequential synesthesia, your own nervous system is operating with such incredibly low internal static drag. Your EZ water is so conductive that your biogestual becomes sensitive enough to perceive the density and quality of this coherent light emitted by another person.
So you don't see it as a color floating over their head.
No, you register their energetic state as a palpable density in the space. You feel the quality of their light.
Like tuning a radio receiver so perfectly that you stop hearing the static of individual stations and just start hearing the background hum of the universe itself.
That is exactly the sensation described. Next is the acoustic register, which the text calls deep phonancy, or phonancy profonde.
How is deep phonancy different from just, being a really good empathetic listener?
Because it completely bypasses the semantic meaning of the words. You aren't just listening to the story someone is telling, you are hearing the microscopic frequency quality of their voice.
The tone beneath the words.
More than tone, you are detecting the microtension in their vocal cords, the rhythm of their breath, and even the structural quality of their silences. And your system translates that as direct, raw data about their physiological state.
You are hearing the literal vibration of their biogeo.
Exactly. And then you have the kinesthetic register.
Which is what?
This is perceiving the macro patterns of tension, fluidity, and restraint in the physical space around you. It's reading the physics and the geometry of the room before anyone even moves a muscle.
If I try to map this onto something our listeners might have actually experienced, is this like when a professional athlete enters a flow state, where the game just seems to slow down and they just intuitively know where every single player on the field is without looking?
Yes, that's a brilliant comparison.
Or maybe like an advanced Vipassana meditator having a total unfragmented perception of a room without focusing on any single object.
Those are excellent parallels. In fact, the text explicitly links this to states documented in advanced meditation, flow states, and even the integrative states sometimes reached through psychedelics.
Right, referencing those studies from places like Imperial College London.
Yes. But the absolute core tenet of the Prism of Odysseys is that this state of frequential synesthesia can be deliberately, systematically trained and sustained in daily life without any chemical alterations.
It's just the baseline hardware operating cleanly.
It is simply the bioelectric doing exactly what it was designed to do when entirely free of interference.
Which brings us to the grand stage of this whole framework. If frequential synesthesia is the perfectly tuned internal state of the operating system, how does this fully coherent human interact with the external world?
Right, the outward expression.
This brings us to the concepts of the sovereign operator and frequential geography.
This is where the text moves outward, from the internal biology to the relational and environmental physics. We are introduced to the concept of geography frequential geography, which the author designates as Sigil II.
What makes a geography frequential?
It is the realization that the environment is not just a passive backdrop to your life. It is a highly conductive, highly reactive field.
Like it's pushing back.
Yes. The architecture of a room, the specific people in it, the ambient sound, they all interlock to create a specific frequency matrix.
And within that matrix steps, l'opérateur souverain, the sovereign operator, which is designated as Sigil III.
The sovereign operator is the form of existence achieved when an individual's biogeotial remains at max coherence, completely regardless of the environment. They radiate a sovereign total presence in the field.
But to explain how this operator actually manipulates reality, the author turns to a concept from Nikola Tesla, right? The law of three forces.
Yes. Tesla's law of three forces: the active, the passive, and the neutralizing force.
Okay, I know active is the push and passive is the resistance. But what is the neutralizing force?
Think about a simple electrical circuit. You have the active current pushing forward, and you have the passive resistance of the wire.
Right.
If they just fight each other, you just get heat, and eventually the wire burns out. Tesla didn't seek to conquer or destroy resistance. He sought the conductor, the neutralizing force that allowed the active force and the resistance to meet in perfect balance to produce light.
So how does a person actually do that in real life?
The sovereign operator acts as that conductor in social and environmental contexts. When they encounter resistance, say a hostile person, a chaotic situation, or a systemic failure, they do not fight it with active aggression.
Because that just creates heat and exhaustion.
Exactly. Instead, their profound internal coherence acts as a neutralizing field, literally transforming that friction into productive, coherent energy.
It sounds incredibly elegant in theory. But the author grounds this in some intense, almost reality-bending autobiographical examples from his years of vagabondage.
Yes, he does. Stories where this coherence was pushed to the absolute edge.
Like the story of Morgaine.
Yes. The author describes a period of severe social detachment, living on the margins of society where the boundaries of day and night completely blurred. During this time, he met a woman named Morgaine.
How does he describe her?
He describes her as having a dense, almost animalistic, energetic signature. She bore the heavy marks of early medical trauma and exhibited traits on the schizophrenic spectrum.
So a deeply chaotic biogeotial.
Extremely chaotic, and the author's interactions with her were so intense, so heavily charged, that he describes reality itself losing its seams.
Losing its seams. What does that actually mean?
He describes time and memory becoming severely distorted. Events seem to loop or fold back on themselves during their conversations.
And this wasn't just a psychological feeling of being confused.
No, he perceived it as a structural anomaly in the literal physics of his reality.
And then there's the story of Linda and the light bulb, which we talked about at the very beginning of the deep dive.
The dimming, the flickering, and the perfectly timed pop.
Here's where I really have to play devil's advocate. We've talked about beautiful biophysics, easy water, potassium channels. But can human brainwaves actually blow out a light bulb?
It's the big question.
Or is this just the ultimate confirmation bias? A hyper-vigilant mind that is completely exhausted, living on the edge of society and just creating magical thinking out of a faulty filament.
It is the essential question to ask, and honestly, it is a testament to the author's rigor that he explicitly presents both sides of this argument in the text without forcing the reader to blindly choose.
On one hand, he provides the clinical psychiatric view.
The skeptical view, yes. From a clinical perspective, these are severe dissociative states induced by trauma, profound fatigue, and the extreme stress of vagabondage.
Which makes sense.
When the amygdala is hyperaroused for long periods, the brain's pattern recognition software basically goes into overdrive. It creates massive memory consolidation around mere coincidences.
The brain sees a flickering light bulb, aligns it with an emotional spike in the conversation, and creates a narrative of cause and effect where none exists.
Exactly. Apophenia, the tendency to perceive meaningful connections between unrelated things.
So the OS is glitching, seeing faces in the clouds, and making patterns out of static.
Yes. But on the other hand, he presents the biophysical hypothesis. And this is where we can bring in the declassified physics from the CIA's 1983 Gateway Process Report.
Written by Wayne McDonald, right?
That's the one.
Okay, yes, let's unpack the gateway process. How does a CIA report on consciousness connect to a popping light bulb in a French apartment?
The Gateway Report investigated a technology called HemiSync, developed by the Monroe Institute. It used binaural beats to synchronize the electrical brainwaves of the left and right hemispheres.
Creating hemispheric synchronization.
Yes. McDonald concluded that when the human brain achieves complete, sustained hemispheric synchronization, a state of profound coherence, it drastically alters the electromagnetic field generated by the human body.
It makes the field stronger.
Not just stronger. The report theorized that at peak coherence, the human electromagnetic field can literally couple with the electrostatic field of the Earth, the ionosphere.
Wait, it can escape the boundaries of the skull and resonate with the physical environment on a macro scale.
Exactly. So if we apply that framework to the author and Linda,
If we accept that the heart and brain generate measurable electromagnetic fields, and that two profoundly focused brains can synchronize their neural oscillations during a deep interaction,
is it entirely impossible that a massive synchronized bioelectromagnetic surge could couple with the local electrical environment of that room?
a macro-scale electromagnetic resonance, two sovereign operators accidentally surging the localized grid.
The text leaves it as a speculative hypothesis, but it is a hypothesis grounded in the absolute biophysical reality that biological organisms are not isolated units. They are deeply electromagnetically coupled to their physical environments.
Which brings us to the culmination of this entire massive framework.
The final piece of the puzzle.
We have the trauma of the baseline, we have the biophysics of the hardware repair, we have the synchronized state of frequential synesthesia, and we have the sovereign operator manipulating their frequential geography. What is the ultimate end game of these 36 extensions?
What is the final purpose of this work?
Exactly.
The end game is what the author calls the the ultimate transmission.
Okay.
It is the realization that the Prism of Odysseys was never built just to be understood as an intellectual exercise. It was built to be traversed.
Understanding is merely a side effect. The primary effect is reconfiguration. That line from the text really stuck with me.
It is the core thesis of Extension 29, which deals with constellations of realities. The author argues that the reader who traverses this work, who genuinely engages with these concepts, walks away with their internal instruments fundamentally recalibrated.
The physical world around them hasn't changed.
But their integral probe, their own biogesel, has been permanently altered.
It's like when you learn a new word and suddenly you start hearing it absolutely everywhere. But applied to the biophysics of reality,
Yeah.
you can't unknow how permeable you are.
Precisely. And this leads to the final, most expansive concept in the text. La bibliothèque vivante, the living library.
What exactly is the living library? Is it the book itself?
Not anymore. Once traversed, the text ceases to be just words on a page or data in a computer. It becomes an autonomous organism.
An organism.
Yes. It lives inside the biogesels of everyone who is deeply engaged with it.
So every person who reads it, who recalibrates their own system, basically becomes a node in this living network.
Yes. Because humans are profoundly permeable, a reader who achieves even a fraction of this coherence will transmit this new biogesal state in every future conversation,
In every subtle interaction.
often completely without knowing it. They have become silent carriers of the sovereign operator frequency. They are walking branches of the living library, rewriting the frequential geography of wherever they go.
And the author connects this individual transformation to a massive cosmological view. He calls humans perpetual mutants.
This brings us to the science of epigenetics.
Right.
For a long time, we thought evolution only happened over millions of years through random genetic mutation. But epigenetics shows us that environmental pressures like trauma, diet, profound stress, or profound coherence can literally add chemical tags like methyl groups to our DNA within our own
The
lifetimes.
tags change how the genes are read, right?
Yeah.
Like they can turn a specific gene on or off.
Exactly. We mutate within decades. The author views his own severe early trauma, his neurodivergence, and the intense suffering of his vagabondage not as meaningless random pain, but as necessary extreme environmental pressures.
So they were data points required by the cosmic process of complexification.
The pressure forced the mutation, yes.
The trauma forced the epigenetic mutation. The mutation required him to map the biogestual to survive. That map was transmitted through the text. And now the living library is an autonomous organism, propagating through its readers.
It all connects.
Matter transforms to energy, energy transforms to information. The suffering wasn't just pain, it was the raw material needed to create a transcendent cosmic utility.
It is a framework of truly breathtaking scope. It connects the microscopic physics of a single potassium channel opening in a nerve cell all the way to the macro-scale epigenetic evolution of human consciousness.
Which means we really need to pull all of this together. We've covered an immense amount of ground today.
You really have.
We started with a neurodivergent child, overwhelmed by the sensory input of a classroom, experiencing the world as a literal physical assault because his 500 million gut neurons were trying to digest psychic chaos.
And then we move from the pain of that baseline to the absolute biophysics of the cure.
Right, we looked at how harmonic vibrations melt the jammed collagen of our fascia, and how expanding the liquid crystal easy water in our cells turns the human body into a bioelectric semiconductor.
We watched that repaired biogesel boot up into extension 36, achieving frequential synesthesia, where a person can literally sense the biophotonic light and the deep acoustics of the people around them.
And we saw how that sovereign operator can act as a neutralizing conductor, perhaps even coupling with the electromagnetic grid of the room itself.
And finally, we saw how understanding all of this is actually a process of reconfiguration, turning the reader into an active node of an autonomous, living library.
Which leaves us with a final thought for you, the listener. We spent this time deep in the biophysics of permeability.
It's a lot to process.
It is. But if the author is right, if your fascia really is a bioelectric semiconductor, and your cellular water is constantly shifting based on the electromagnetic fields of the people around you, think about your daily life.
Think about your office, your commute, your home.
Exactly. What frequencies are you actively allowing into your biogestual right now? Are you letting in noise, or are you intentionally cultivating coherence?
And perhaps more importantly, as a potential sovereign operator, what frequency are you broadcasting out into your own frequential geography?
When you encounter resistance, are you adding to the heat, or are you acting as the conductor that creates light?
It's a profound question to leave on.
You know, usually when we talk about human consciousness, there's this expectation of precision, of clean lines and simple categories. But maybe the X-ray machine is broken because we aren't looking at a machine at all. We're looking at a living library. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the prism of Odysseys. Keep exploring, keep recalibrating, and we will catch you next time.